Alright, so in today's video we're going to be talking about camp stoves. Now I know when you're first getting started it can be a little overwhelming because there's so many different types and makes and models and options that are available to you. So in today's video I'm going to go over some of those options and kind of show you some pros and cons. Everything you see here, there's going to be links in the description box down below, but don't buy a stove because it's in a description box. The three things that I consider before I buy a stove: number one being, can it boil a large amount of water? Number two, can it cook food? I know that I eat a lot of Mountain House and dehydrated meals where all I have to do is boil water, but I also wanted to be able to cook chicken and soup and different meals as well. And then the third thing is, can I use it as a heat source in case of an emergency? Am I able to take a Mylar blanket, wrap up around it, and stay warm through the night and push on through the next day? And so those are the three factors that I focus on. I have different options here. Just to forewarn you, there are solid fuel options that I'm not going to be showing because I personally haven't found any that fits all three of those criteria. If you have, make sure to leave it in the comment section below so that people can utilize those options. But for right now, I got three different options. I got wood burning, alcohol, and then gas or canister stoves. And so starting off with the wood, when it comes to a wood burning stove, it's essentially a mini fireplace, and we all know the benefits of having a fire. It'll keep you warm, it'll cook, it'll boil water, it'll do everything you need it to do. Everybody loves sitting around a fire. For me, there are two options here. There are these ones that are more just stands. So you would start a fire and then you would put the stand in the fire, and that way you can put different pots and pans on top of it. And these work really well. And then you have your dedicated wood burning stoves. And the advantage to having a dedicated wood burning stove is that when we have campfires and bonfires and everything's all said and done, there's usually like a half burnt log and some embers and a lot of wasted material. When you use a dedicated wood burning stove, it's a lot more efficient. It efficiently burns everything so that the only thing that's left over is a little bit of ash. There is no unburnt sticks, there's no unburnt anything. It's a much more efficient way of burning your fuel. Another huge advantage to a wood burning stove is the fuel is everywhere. You can use sticks, twigs, pine cones, barks, leaves, grass, anything that'll burn, you can put into these stoves and use them. So all you really need to carry is a couple of tools. So here I have a folding saw and a knife, which are tools you're probably going to have on you anyway. And so with a couple tools that you're going to be carrying anyway, you essentially have an infinite amount of fuel. And so you would think that this would be the end-all be-all perfect system. And for a lot of people it is, but if you're just getting started, I wouldn't recommend it at all actually. Because when you're first getting started and you're in the practicing stage, I always tell people you need to rely on your gear. You need to have good gear, because if your gear fails, you fail. And as you practice and you accumulate the skill of starting fire, even when it's actively raining, even when the weather conditions aren't as optimal as you'd like them to be, as soon as you become self-reliant in your fire making, that's when this becomes a good option. When you have the skills to get that fire started. If you're in the practicing stage and you're just getting started and you choose a wood burning stove and it's actively raining and you can't get that fire started, you're not going to be able to keep warm, you're not going to boil water, and you're not going to cook any food. And so it basically becomes worthless if you don't have the skills to make it work. And so if you're first getting started, I wouldn't recommend a wood burning stove. Which brings me into what I started with, and what I started with is an alcohol stove. And the reason I started with an alcohol stove is because essentially you can make it out of anything. Here I have two bottom halves of a Mountain Dew can with some holes in it. I have some chicken coop wire that I found. essentially the burner itself was free. I didn't spend any extra money to make this burner. The fuel, I use Yellow Heat. I can usually get this for 50 cents for a 12-ounce bottle in the springtime. And so fuel is very inexpensive. You can use denatured alcohol, and there's a lot of different flammable alcohols that you can use. The store-bought options are usually pretty affordable, and they work really well. I like this Pathfinder option. It's one of my favorites. And the advantages here is it's going to boil water. It's going to cook your food. It's going to be able to hold a lot of different size pots and pans, just like the wood burning stove would. You can even use the small nesting cups on these burners. And so you're able to use a lot of different pots and pans. You're able to cook a lot of different kinds of foods. There is a slight learning curve to cooking on an alcohol stove because you really can't adjust the temperature. I know they make these simmer rings, but they don't really work that well because you usually have to have some kind of a stand, and so then the simmer rings are in the way of the stands, and it just doesn't really work out that well. And so what you end up doing is you end up moving the pan around to utilize it for to distribute that heat, and then you're taking it on and off the heat so that you don't burn whatever you're cooking. So there is a slight learning curve, but it's not really that big of a deal. It is a really good option. Again, you would think this would be the end all be all because the fuel is readily available. The other advantage of the fuel is that you can see how much you're burning. You can see, I'm going to over exaggerate, but if you need this much fuel and you're using it as an emergency fire starter or an emergency heat source, you know that you need to leave that much fuel for water and food the next day, and you can watch it as it's burning. I mentioned that it can be used as an emergency fire starter. Sometimes I like to take paper towel, or I'll just dump it onto some sticks and twigs and leaves. So if it's cold out and it's rainy and I need heat source, I can pour this alcohol onto something else, get a fire started, and then save the fuel that's in here. And so a lot of advantages, but again, it is a very dangerous system. If I have it on the table here and I have a full bottle, a full stove, and it falls off this table, I go from having plenty of fuel to no fuel. None at all. And so you have to be extremely careful. And if it's lit and you knock it over, that fire is gonna spread and you can burn a lot of things down. You can ruin a lot of things. These are very dangerous systems, but you have to ask, is the risk versus the reward? Again, you know how much fuel you have. You can look in it and see how much you have. You can look and see how much you're burning. You can use it for everything you need to use it for. You can use it as an emergency fire starter. And so, again, it is dangerous. You have to be extremely careful. And so, I don't know if I would recommend it to everyone, but it is a good option. Moving on to the final option here is gas stoves or canister stoves. And so we'll start with this big guy right here. A lot of people have seen these. This is a single burner. You know, there's those big green Coleman double burners. There's a lot of different burners like this, and essentially it's exactly the same as using your stove top. And so cooking on it is very easy. Boiling water on it's very easy. You can use it as a heat source, and there is no learning curve. It's exactly the same as using the stove at home. You have a little dial here for maximum heat, medium heat, simmer. You just turn a dial to adjust the temperature. Very, very, very easy to use. One of the downsides to this big contraption here is if you have like a small nesting cup, it's not going to work on the platform that's provided. You're going to need something a little bit larger, but even this Keith's titanium pan fits on there really well. It's a little bit bigger than a canister stove, or a canister for a canister stove, in case you're wondering. So you don't need anything real big, but you do need something bigger than a nesting cup. The alternative to this, that's big, it's bulky, it's hard to carry. There are smaller options. You see Caroline using these all the time. We have like 3 or 4 of them. And these are really easy to use. Again, you can turn it up, turn it down. You can adjust the heat really well. This being smaller, again, you kind of have to distribute the heat a little bit, but you don't have to pull it off and pull it back on. You can just adjust the heat as you're cooking. So there's a little bit of a learning curve again with the smaller burner compared to the larger burner, but you should have no problem cooking, boiling water, or using it as a heat source. The downside to a canister stove though is you have no idea how much fuel you have. You have no idea how much fuel you're using. You have no idea how much is left. You basically just shake it, and if it feels like there's enough in there, you can bring it. Feels like there's not enough in there, you might want to bring a second one. You might just want to always bring a second canister just in case. But there are times where I'll be cooking something and I think there's enough fuel in there, and then all of a sudden it goes out and it's empty. And so then I have to quick go get the other canister, swap it out, and it's kind of a pain just because I can't see what's going on. If I could see the fuel, you know, it wouldn't be a problem, but I don't know, it does get to be annoying not knowing exactly how much fuel you have. I know you can weigh an empty can and a full can and then weigh it, but you're not going to do that while you're out camping, especially if you're using it as a heat source. The last thing you want is to be being all toasty, warm, comfortable, and it goes out because it's out of fuel. So that is a downside to a canister stove, but again, they are the easiest to use. If you're looking strictly for cooking and boiling water, canister and gas stoves are the easiest to use. They are extremely easy, extremely convenient. I highly recommend a canister gas stove if you're strictly looking for something to cook and boil water. In those emergency situations, the alcohol stove, they are dangerous. You do need to be extremely careful, but they're so versatile. You can use them to start a separate fire. You can use them as a heat source. You can use them, you can ration your fuel out a lot better. So if you're lost, you know how much fuel you have, you can ration it out. You can do different things, you know how many meals you have left with the amount of fuel that you have. It's just, if you're gonna be in a situation where something bad might happen, I really like having an alcohol stove with me. And then again, if you have the skills, if you have that self-reliance of knowing that you can start a fire in any weather condition and any environment, a wood burning stove is again a really, really good option. You're going to be able to do a lot, and you're not going to have to carry extra fuel. You don't have to worry about spilling anything. You don't have to worry about carrying anything. You don't have to worry about anything at all. You just basically bring this and you're good to go for as long as you want. So with that being said, make sure to leave any knowledge or questions in that comment section. I want to know, is there anything that I left out? Is there any advice that you would give somebody looking to buy their first camp stove? And also, if you have any questions, don't be shy. I try to answer every single question that you guys give me. And then there should be a video popping up on the screen here. Don't forget to click on that, because I'd like to get your opinion on more than just stoves. So I'll see you guys on that next one.